Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Rent Prep for Landlords. Steve, this is episode 230.
Wow. You know what? We didn't do a mic check on me, so.
I did it before the podcast.
Man, you're on top of it.
Yeah, and you know what? This one goes out to CJ Maurer. He's a gentleman that I used to work with who at times could be quite corny, and he had a favorite joke. And he used to like to ask, hey, Eric, what time is the dentist appointment for?
I don't know.
2:30.
2:30. Oh, man.
This is episode 230.
Shout out to CJ.
Welcome to the Rent Prep for Landlords podcast. And now your hosts, Stephen White and Eric Worrell.
All right. So we got a pretty packed episode today. We actually have a call in on the landlord hotline. That hotline bling.
Nice.
Yep. So we got a little tip that came in from one of our members of the Rent Prep for Landlords Facebook group, which we're going to discuss here in a minute. And then we also have some in the news segments, and one of them's pretty funny. So if you guys could use a laugh today, we got some nice landlord tips, or I should say tenant tips from The Onion, if you're familiar with that source of news.
Yeah. You know, lately it's the only place I get my news.
It's all fake.
Yeah.
It's all fake. So why don't we start off today's episode with a landlord hotline call. And this one is coming from Illinois. And if you are interested, you can call if you have a tip, a comment, a question. Our hotline is 716-218-0363. That'll take you right to a Google Voice recorded voicemail. That'll tell you to just leave a message, and you have 3 minutes to leave a message with your tip or comment. So why don't we roll that right now?
Hi guys, this is Natalie from Illinois, and I wanted to share a tip on collecting past due rent from a former tenant. I was able to collect on a recent tenant, but my collection agency charges anywhere from 30 to 40% fee on anything they collect. That's why it's important to have a mention in your lease that the tenant is responsible for those fees. That way I recover 100% of the money owed me, and the tenant has to pay those collection fees. You can word it however you want, maybe check with your attorney, but you need something in your lease that states that the tenant is responsible for all collection costs. Thanks. Bye.
So I was all excited about this little tip, and then Steve's like, oh, yeah, no. We've talked about that on the podcast before.
Well, I've got a lot of collection background, as do some of the other employees here at Rent Prep, because it's credit industry related. So she's 100% right, and it's really great advice. The only thing I would even add to it is to make sure that you include attorney's fees as well. So, you know, if you're paying your attorney to file an eviction, if you're paying your attorney to seek a judgment, anything like that. But really, most importantly, in her nugget of advice there is to check with your local attorney as well. Just make sure that the language is right, that you can, in your state, charge for that stuff and can recuperate the costs of that. But great tip. She's 100% right. I actually think that she's getting a pretty good deal on the collection agency, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
50% is not unusual or uncommon at all. So if she's getting it for 30%, that's a steal.
I'm sure that we'll probably get somebody emailing or calling and saying, who is that collection agency that worked with her? So what I'll do in the show notes is I will link to the Facebook post in our Facebook group, because that's how this started. She puts the information of the company in there.
Oh, cool.
If you're not part of the group, then this is a backwards way for us to get you inside of the group if you're looking for that information. Right. So again, that came in on the landlord hotline. Thank you to Natalie for leaving that voicemail. Again, if you guys have any interest in leaving a comment, tip, or question, that is 716-218-0363. And the best part is you don't have to talk to a person. It goes right to voicemail. Who wants to talk to a person?
Yeah.
When's the last time you talked to a person?
It's 2018. I don't talk to people anymore.
No. I go to my app and I walk into Panera and I grab my food. Right. I don't even make eye contact with the cashier.
Why would you waste your time doing that?
I don't want her to know I'm contributing to your job loss in 2 years.
Right. Oh, jeez. Yeah. Automate everything.
The robots are taking over, Steve.
Yep, for sure.
Okay. Well, I don't really have a segue for that to our next section, but we're going to go into the news, and we've got 3 recent articles that have come up in the last couple of weeks, and wanted to discuss them with the audience here, Steve. Mm-hmm. So I wanted to get your thoughts on this too. So why don't we go in order here? of them being open. I might have lied. I might have 4 articles that we might discuss here.
Ooh, okay.
Yeah. But why don't we start with this one? A lot of people have heard about it, but I haven't thought about it in real estate terms. So the title of this comes from CNN Business. This is from Paul R. LaMonica of CNN Business, and this is on October 15, 2018. And the title of the article says, "Landlords across America are cheering Sears bankruptcy." I think everybody, unless you're living under a rock, has heard that Sears announced bankruptcy and they're closing 142 stores by the year end. But the thing I found really interesting about it was one of their landlords is a company called PIMCO, which has a bunch of like higher end commercial retail stores. And they were locked in on, it looks like 14 Sears and Kmart stores for $525 per square foot.
Well below the average of $15.95 per square foot.
Yeah.
And they were locked into these deals for decades, it says.
Yeah.
Which is pretty shocking.
Yeah.
Kind of bad business on their part, maybe, but I get why they would do it. You know, you have an anchor store, you want to lock them into a long-term deal. And, you know, listen, it's sad for me. I grew up in the mall era. You did too, you know. It's weird to go into a mall nowadays and they turn Sears into a batting cage or, you know, indoor paintball or something. I don't know. It's just weird to me that,
Yeah.
you know, that they are repurposing this. And listen, at the end of the day, these malls are dying out. And I don't know if Kimco is going to be able to get more than $525 per square foot anyway.
Well, they claim they are now.
How much
so
is the
we'll
batting
see.
cage going to be paying per square foot? I mean, that's the real question.
I guess these stores are kind of in pretty affluent areas of Los Angeles, Miami,
Yeah.
Long Island, like the Hamptons. So I know that one book I've talked to you about before, it's called The Four, and it's by Scott Galloway, who's an economist, and I believe he works at NYU. He's a professor there. And one of the things he said is the mall is not dying in affluent areas. The mall is dying in like middle income and low income areas where, you know, you could come to your own conclusions, but I think he might have mentioned in the book that in the affluent areas, you know, there may be somebody who's staying home with the kids or, you know, single parent, or not a single parent, but they don't have kids yet, and they have all this money and they want the experience of going in these really nice stores. So the really affluent areas, and that's the reason that Amazon bought Whole Foods, is because Whole Foods is a distribution center that is based around all the affluent areas in the United States. Like there's no Whole Foods in like low income areas.
Right.
So what they did is they pretty much bought a distribution model of like, oh my gosh, like we can buy this one company and now we are within 5 miles of 75% of everyone in the upper class in America.
Right.
So I don't know. That's a little bit of a tangent, but I found that really fascinating in that book. And, you know, if you're ever looking for a good book to read and you like reading up on like Google, Amazon, Facebook, and I'm trying to think of the fourth company. Apple.
Apple. Yep.
Yeah, it really is a deep dive on those. So, but yeah, he talks a lot about these you know, these stores and malls and what they're doing with them.
Yeah, it seems crazy to me that they'd lock into decades-long leases.
Well, you got a 10-year here, didn't you?
I got a 10-year, yeah. I said, absolutely, let's do it for 10-year if you're going to cut some off the price. So, yeah, I mean, I get it. And if you're in an area where you want to lock somebody in or you don't want to deal with the turnover or whatever the reasoning might be. But, yeah, there's a downside to that for sure. You know, I'm sure at the 10-year mark, you know, the building owner that we're in right now is probably looking at it and can't wait to re-sign a new lease because, you know, he's losing after about years 5 through 10.
Yeah.
No doubt.
Another article that I got pulled up here. I actually heard about this on the way into work today. I was listening to a podcast and they were saying that this guy, Stephen Goldstein, who used to work in credit at Sears, wrote a book, and the title of the book is called "Why Are There Snowblowers in Miami?"
I love that.
Just an aside, like a little bit of a note on Sears. I guess this guy used to work in credit department for Sears, so he would visit all the different stores. And when he went to the Miami store, he was asking them, he's like, "Why are you guys selling snowblowers?" And they're like, "I don't know. They just send it to us, and then we send it back at the end of the year."
It's crazy. It's perfect example of big business, weird decision making. Usually the left hand doesn't know what the right hand's doing. We've seen it time and time again in the you know, a lot of the big businesses that we deal with. It's crazy to me.
You know what? Every once in a while, a segue does work out, Steve. So I'm going to segue into our next article here because I feel like this actually matters as far as talking about big business versus small business and what the differences are.
Yeah.
If you guys have listened to a lot of episodes of our podcast here, you know that we don't pitch our services a lot. We don't want to make a podcast. It's just like, let us tell you about how great RentPrep is today.
Yeah.
And this is kind of a weird way to do it because it's unfortunate news in our industry.
Yeah. It's terrifying, actually.
Recently, there was a major settlement between the FTC and a company called RealPage. If you're not familiar, RealPage is, like Buildium, Appfolio, where they service property manager clients, and they have all sorts of services built into their software, including tenant screening. So, Steve, you could probably do a better job if you want to of explaining exactly what this is about soft matches and why they were sued by the FTC.
Yeah, it's basically the reason that we use real live human screeners here at RentPrep is because when you do a search on somebody,
I should mention, I'm sorry, but not to interrupt, $3 million. I don't think I actually said that. That was the settlement. So this isn't like a small little slap on the wrist from the FTC. This is a pretty hefty fine that they got.
It's a landmark settlement litigation. To date, it is the largest settlement for a credit reporting agency. So, yeah, not good news for credit reporting agencies that this now opens up a whole new aspect to things. But I always feel like we're pretty protected here. The basis of the settlement is they had a lot of mismatches on criminal records. And because courts do not house criminal records by social security numbers anymore, that would be the easiest way as an identifier to say, yeah, this is the right person or not the right person. Now these records are housed by usually name and a date of birth. And of course, you can have multiple people with the same name or similar name. And
what was the example? I think they said it was Anthony
Smith. And then they said it would also pull up results for Antonio Smith, Tony Smith. So you're running a background check.
I even remember there being a female version of it where it seemed like
Antoinette Smith.
Yeah.
That's a guess, but yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I see it with my name, Stephen with a PH, Stephen with a VEN, Stephanie.
So I guess what I'm interested in, though, like this is really, really interesting to us because this is our industry. This is a landmark case, and what's the takeaway for a landlord? Like, why should they care? I know that RealPage is saying that they're updating the way that they do things, but what's the difference between a service that does have screeners in office versus one that's kind of just using automatic reports?
So if you're using automatic reports, it's grabbing anything that could potentially be related, and for good reason, because Anthony might go by Tony, and he may have records under the name Tony. As crazy as that seems, that he would have legal records under a not legal name necessarily, but that happens all the time. The courts make all kinds of mistakes, oversights, overlook things. They'll use aliases, they'll use nicknames, they'll use common names. We'll see funny ones in there sometimes, like Snake or, like gang names and stuff like that.
I'm literally laughing because I only know one person with an alias, and it's Snake.
Yeah, oh, really?
Yeah, it's in his record. He had a few brewskis one night.
Yeah.
And he always used to joke around that his alter ego was Snake, and
there you go.
He got in trouble with the Popo, and now he has the official alias of Snake.
Well, it's not that uncommon.
Yeah.
It's crazy, but. Yeah, we see it all the time when we run a background check on anyone. Our screeners in-house are verifying that it's the person that you want the background check on and not some other Antonio Smith. It's the Antonio Smith that you're looking for. And so we use different identifiers. The reason that RealPage got into trouble was because they were using soft matching, which means they weren't digging and finding what we usually have as a criteria is at least 3 different identifiers: the name, the address, and a date of birth match.
Okay, so if you had a Tonio or maybe a Tony Smith and then an Antonio Smith, a screener would look at it and then they'd say, you know what, like this one's in Miami, but that one's in Oklahoma City. Let's dig a little bit further, kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Or let's say one Antonio Smith has a super generic date of birth, like 1/1/1900, because we see that a lot too, where the courts get lazy, or they put something in there that was, unable to read, and so now the basic databases default to a default date of birth, and so now it gives you this crazy looking date of birth that doesn't look correct, but it still might be your person. So we're considering all those things when we're looking at records of, does this belong to the person? Is this a case of the courts not entering enough data or not having enough in there? And RealPage was basically using machines to do the matching versus using a human being. Now, there are plenty of cases where I can make an argument. We were just joking about, people at Panera losing their jobs to automation or, technology. There are plenty of things in this world that technology serves a good purpose and makes things faster and better.
Like a microwave?
Yeah. But when it comes to, background checks, it's not doing you any favors. Really the old school way, a human being, intelligence, some sort of logic there that's saying, let me dig further, let me lift up this rock, let me look a little bit more. So, yeah.
I think one of the things that's interesting about this too is I'm relieved for our client's sake that there were no landlords pulled into this. They sued the CRA, the Consumer Reporting Agency. But that being said, this is a landmark case, first time that we've seen this kind of dollar amount, FTC going after a CRA like this.
Yeah.
According to the FCRA, the Fair Credit Reporting Act, there is a bullet item in that in the FCRA that does say that the landlord is also responsible. So according to the FCRA, if the FTC wanted to make an example out of a landlord, they could for using faulty data.
And make no mistake, this may not be over. A savvy attorney can come back now from a class action point of view and say, we have evidence that the Federal Trade Commission successfully settled with RealPage. They acknowledged the mistakes they were making. Now we're going to go backwards. And
actually, I think they said they didn't make any mistakes was part of the settlement.
Well,
I always love how that works. We are paying a $3 million fine, but we're not admitting any wrong.
Right.
It's like the steroid guy or whatever, Rafael Palmeiro, who stood there and he's like, I did not take any kind of performance enhancers,
Right.
You never admit wrong.
Right. Yeah. So in this case, I feel like it may not be over yet, but scary stuff just to make sure that you're always doing the right thing. And that is a perfect segue into
I was thinking the same thing,
our
Steve.
next...
We're 2 for 3 on segues today.
I know. In the news article, I definitely encourage you to look this one up because...
it'll be in the resources of the episode.
The picture of the guy is...
well, it's funny because if the title of this blog post was like, man saves woman from drowning or something, you'd be like, oh, he looks nice. But the title's not so nice, so you can feel confident about making fun of this guy.
Yeah, he's a bad landlord. He looks like a creep. I mean, there's no other way to put it. And
the segue was nice because this is a landlord from Minnesota who is part of a class action lawsuit that was how much?
$18.5 million. $18.5 million.
That's a lot of pennies.
It's disturbing.
Yeah.
But classic case of a bad apple ruining the bunch. Here's a landlord that got away with, or thought he was getting away with for years, not keeping up with his buildings, having his tenants living in, as they say, vermin-infested housing, all kinds of issues. And this looks to me, as you read the article, that this was a long time coming.
Yeah.
And the scary thing is if you're a landlord that deals with a high volume of tenants and you now are in that class action category, right? If you're a one-off landlord or you have a handful of properties, the chances of you facing a class action lawsuit are pretty slim. But if you have 1,000+ doors,
you got a target on your back.
You got a target, and make no mistake, attorneys have every reason to go after you as hard as they possibly can. In this case of $18.5 million, the law firm made out with $6.5 million of that to pay their bill. So you don't think attorneys have skin in the game on this? You're wrong. They are looking for this sort of thing. So again, Eric always says that I'm a fearmonger in a lot of ways, but I live in this world of compliance and see the worst of things. And usually I have the attitude of if it can go wrong, it probably will. And landlords, I think, need to have that same bit of attitude as well, that look at everything you're doing from the perspective of if or when this goes wrong, where is my liability lay? Where, what risk am I being exposed to right now? And how do I prevent that or limit that?
Yeah. Well, I feel like we've done a lot of fear mongering on this episode, and we need to, finish it on a light note. So if you guys are familiar with theonion.com, we got an article that came in through there. I don't think they actually give credit for who writes these articles for them. And I should probably go back and just mention for the controversial landlord who was sued $18.5 million. That came from Randy First of Star Tribune. I just feel like, it's kind of like writing a blog post. You got to like make your little,
I like it.
Give them a little credit, right?
Yeah.
All right. Well, why don't we move on to The Onion? So the title of this blog post from them, and it's a satire website in case you don't know, so I don't want somebody calling in and being like, what was that? But the title of the blog post is Tips for Dealing with a Difficult Landlord. And I thought maybe we could go one by one, Steve. We'll go every other and read these off.
Yeah, these are really useful tips.
So this is tips for dealing with a difficult landlord. So this is to the tenant. First tip. More Americans rent their home now than at any point in the past 50 years, and many tenants have contended with the landlords who make their lives miserable. The Onions offer tips for dealing with a difficult landlord. So here is your first tip.
To ensure that repairs are dealt with in a timely manner, always put your maintenance request 1 to 2 months before something breaks.
I liked it. I thought that you did a good job. There was a little bit of, facetiousness.
Yeah.
Is that a word? Facetiousness?
Yeah.
But I feel like as we go, we should add a little bit more of the sarcasm laid on thicker.
Okay.
And we got a few to read here, so it can't go too quick. But by the end, I think it's got to, be really apparent that these are fake.
Yeah.
We should also say that's a good, it's a little bit of a joke there, but that's makes it apparent that it's important to tenants, and that's been done in surveys and studies that timely repairs are one of the biggest sticking points for tenants.
Mm-hmm.
So if you want to keep a tenant and your tenant retention is important to you, timely repairs are a huge part of that.
Yeah.
All right. Next tip. It's vital to know your rights as a tenant, so find out what all 2 or 3 of them are.
Love it. If you can afford the services of a lawyer, use that money to move to a better apartment.
I feel like a landlord might have wrote that tip, actually.
Yeah. That's actually a really great one. If we can keep one of these in here, that's a great tip. I feel like every landlord would be like, yeah, that's a good one.
Instead of getting into a heated shouting match with your landlord, calmly let them know how you feel by paying your rent with a giant bag of pennies.
When you feel like you're getting frustrated with your landlord, remember that they're just humans trying to exploit you for capital like everyone else.
That one's just twist the knife, right?
It burned a little.
All right. Try to see things from their perspective. Maybe you did bring rats into the apartment with you. These feel like kind of like the more you know.
Yeah.
A little star goes over your head.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Always read your entire lease so that you know how many roommates you're allowed to have and how many you're allowed to keep secret. It's super relevant too.
Yeah. Well, you got a point to bring up on that, or you want to keep reading?
No, it's relevant because we hear about it all the time.
Mm-hmm. Meet with your fellow tenants to share complaints against your landlord. Build a sense of solidarity around your shared grievances while insisting action needs to be taken. Proceed to arm yourself with an array of lethal weapons. Drape a banner reading "Property is theft" across the front of your apartment building to let the owner know it's been transformed into an anarchist squat, and barricade yourself for a final showdown with the law enforcement officials.
Seems crazy, but almost realistic.
I'm not even sure what I just said.
Yeah, all of these seem pretty realistic. It's always good to know, I think, for a landlord to see things from the other point of view. Mm-hmm. So, if you really want the best points of view, this is probably terrible advice, and I know that a lot of property management companies will hate me bringing this up, but property management companies have some of the lowest Google ratings that there are. And sometimes it's not their own fault. I completely agree with that. Sometimes it is their fault. But if you want to see some really common tenant grievances and some real hot topics or hot buttons for tenants, just start searching some local property management companies or apartment communities in your own area and start looking at their Google reviews. It's always baffling to me that
Well, I think it's a really tough one to have good reviews on, because if you get to a certain size, you're going to get tenants that are upset about something that you can't control.
Right.
Where, like, if you owned a car dealership and you had to repo somebody's car, or your bank that had to repo somebody's car, is somebody going to go and leave that bank a nasty review and saying, hey, these jerks repoed my car because I couldn't pay my bills?
Right.
I don't know if they would. But
Right.
somebody who's dealing with a similar situation with a property management company or a big time landlord, if they were, I guess a landlord probably wouldn't have a place you could leave reviews, but I could see them doing that, but then twisting it and being like, well, they did this, the premises were disgusting. They never, really the issue was they didn't, pay rent.
Right. And I find a lot of times we get a lot of blog comments. We still have to do a segment on blog comments because
They cray.
one is crazier than the next usually, but we get a lot of tenants that respond on our blog. And if I'm responding to them, my usual response is try to communicate with your landlord, because a lot of their grievances or the craziness comes out and they'll say something like, what's the law about this or about that, or what can I do? And I'll say, well, what's in your lease, or what does your landlord say about it? Well, I haven't talked to the landlord yet. Well, talk to your landlord. Simple. Figure it out. I mean, a lot of times the landlords, property management companies aren't given the opportunity to correct a situation maybe they're not aware of or are even aware that there's a problem.
I just had an idea, and I think I might have shared this with you before, so I apologize. I didn't hear anything you said for the last minute. I'm just being honest.
I like it.
Just being real.
Yeah.
And this is going to be a weird way to end this podcast.
All
right. You remember that video where it was like, what does the fox say?
Yeah, I do. Yes. Mid-2000s-ish. Yeah.
I kind of want to go back and see if I can like edit that video and just replace the word fox with lease. And then we'll just share that into the Facebook group when like people like ask questions like, how should I handle this with my tenant? And that video comes up and just goes, what does the lease say?
Right. So true. And it always comes back to that. What does your lease say? I don't know. Who's responsible for shoveling the snow? I don't know. What does your lease say?
What does your lease say?
Yeah.
If you guys haven't watched that video, it's quite disturbing. It's like a modern day like Clockwork Orange where you're like, what is this?
That's a pretty great idea. I feel like we should have that on a perpetual GIF or loop that we can just post up there and post it to blog comments too, because that's my standard answer I feel like that I give is go back to your lease. What does it say?
Oh, that's happening this week.
Yeah, I love it.
All right. Well, all the things that we were talking about here, we'll do our best to always include them on the show notes. So check out the show notes on rentprep.com. You can find the blog in the header if you're ever looking for that. And this is episode 230, as you know, because my 230.
My 230. Yeah.
All right. Well, until next week, everybody. Take care.